There's a moment that happens to almost everyone, and nobody likes to talk about it. You're in the middle of a sentence, a word you've used 1,000 times, a name you know as well as your own, and it simply isn't there. Not delayed, gone. You feel the shape of it, the weight of it, but the word itself has slipped through something. You can't see or touch, you move on, you find a way around it, and later, alone, you wonder if that was nothing or if it was the beginning of something. Most people choose to believe it was nothing, but what if the more honest answer is that something has been shifting inside the brain for years quietly, without pain, without announcement, and that the moments of blankness are simply the first time it has become visible? This video is about what is actually happening inside your brain while you sleep, not in a general sense. Specifically, biologically. And it is about 5 foods that directly support a process most people have never heard of, a process that, when it runs well, keeps memory sharp and the mind clear, and when it doesn't, allows a slow and invisible decline to build across years before anyone notices. Stay with this, because by the end, the decision you make about dinner tonight will carry a meaning it never did before. For most of human history, sleep was treated as the brain going quiet. The body rests, the mind rests, and everything resumes in the morning. What neuroscience has uncovered in the past 15 years is something almost the opposite of that, and it may be one of the most important discoveries in the study of human aging. During deep sleep, the brain becomes intensely active in a way that has nothing to do with dreaming or processing emotion. A fluid that surrounds the brain and spinal cord begins moving in slow, coordinated waves, washing through the brain's tissue, collecting the metabolic waste that accumulated throughout the day and clearing it out before morning. This system has a name, the glymphatic system, and what it removes each night is not trivial. Among the substances it clears is a protein called beta-amyloid. If that name is familiar, it is because of its central role in Alzheimer's disease. In a brain that sleeps well and has the nutritional resources to support this process, beta-amyloid is flushed efficiently. The system keeps pace with what builds up, the brain stays clear. But when deep sleep is disrupted or when the brain lacks specific nutrients that keep this clearing process running properly, beta-amyloid is not fully removed. It remains, it accumulates, and here is the part that most people never hear until it becomes personally relevant. This accumulation begins years before any cognitive symptom appears, sometimes more than a decade before. The forgetting, the fog, the moments of blankness. By the time those surface, the process has already been underway for a long time. This is not a distant concern for later. For most adults over 60, it is a present one happening right now, every night, in a direction determined largely by what was on their plate a few hours earlier. Before we get to the foods, there is one more piece of the mechanism worth understanding, because it changes how you see everything that follows. Surrounding the blood-brain barrier,
structure called
vigilant
the blood-brain
barrier.
It allows nutrients through while blocking threats.
Its job is to control what enters the brain's environment, allowing nutrients and oxygen through while blocking inflammatory compounds and pathogens. In a younger brain, it performs this function with remarkable precision. But with age, the tight cellular junctions that hold it together begin to loosen. And when that happens, inflammatory molecules that would previously have been turned away begin seeping into the brain's own environment. Once inside, they interfere with deep sleep. They slow the glymphatic clearing process. They damage the connections between neurons and disrupt the chemical balance that memory depends on. This is the environment in which most adults over 60 are sleeping every night, and most of them have no idea it is happening because nothing about it hurts or announces itself. But here's what most people don't realize: the integrity of that barrier and the level of inflammation behind it is directly responsive to what you eat, not over decades, over days and weeks. The brain's internal environment shifts with the nutritional inputs it receives, and the evening hours, when the body is preparing for sleep, represent the highest leverage window for delivering what the brain needs. The first food is one most people recognize immediately but have never fully understood in this context: blueberries. Not as a fruit, not as something to add to yogurt, as one of the most targeted brain-protective foods available to an aging human being, with clinical research behind it that is more specific and more striking than most people expect. Blueberries contain compounds called anthocyanins. These are the pigments that give the fruit its color, and they have a property that is genuinely unusual in nutritional science. They cross the blood-brain barrier. They pass through the gatekeeper and enter the brain's own environment directly, where they neutralize the free radicals that damage neurons, reduce the inflammatory signaling that disrupts sleep and repair, and actively reinforce the barrier structure itself. Researchers at Tufts University and the University of Cincinnati found measurable improvements in memory performance and cognitive processing speed in older adults who consumed blueberries consistently over several months. The improvements showed up in cognitive testing and in brain imaging. These were not theoretical benefits or statistical trends. They were changes visible in the structure and function of aging brains that received this specific input regularly. A cup of blueberries in the evening, fresh or frozen, the nutritional difference is negligible, delivers anthocyanins into the bloodstream during the exact window when the brain is transitioning toward deep sleep and the glymphatic system is beginning to activate. By the time the deepest phases of sleep arrive, the inflammatory environment inside the brain has already begun to shift. That shift matters, and it is the foundation on which the other four foods build. The second food is one that's in grocery stores without much fanfare, small and overlooked, with nothing about its appearance to suggest what it contains. Pumpkin seeds. To understand why they matter, you have to understand something about what deep sleep actually requires to happen. Sleep is not a single state, it moves through stages, lighter phases and deeper ones, and it is within the deepest phases that the glymphatic system reaches its peak activity, that memory consolidation moves into high gear, that the brain's immune cells perform their maintenance work. Everything that makes sleep genuinely restorative rather than simply unconscious happens there. Getting there and staying there requires specific neurochemical conditions, and one of the most important regulators of those conditions is a mineral that the majority of adults over 60 are not consuming in sufficient quantities: magnesium. Magnesium quiets the nervous system in the hours before sleep. It binds to receptors that reduce excess neural firing, the kind of low-level mental activity that keeps the brain in lighter, less restorative sleep even when the body is exhausted. Without enough of it, sleep becomes shallower. The deep stages are harder to reach and shorter when they arrive, and a brain that cannot consistently reach deep sleep is a brain whose nightly repair system operates at a fraction of its actual capacity. Pumpkin seeds are among the most concentrated food sources of magnesium available, but what makes them worth specific attention is the combination they carry alongside it. Zinc, essential for the regulation of the brain's own immune cells and for the signaling between neurons. When zinc is insufficient, those immune cells become dysregulated, contributing to neuroinflammation that compounds the damage already being done by a leaky blood-brain barrier. And tryptophan, the amino acid the body converts first into serotonin and then into melatonin, not a supplement, a natural precursor, arriving through food, supporting the brain's own production of the compounds that govern when and how deeply sleep occurs. 3 compounds operating together in a small handful of seeds eaten in the evening. Magnesium creating the conditions for deep sleep, zinc regulating the immune environment within it, tryptophan supporting the brain's own sleep chemistry. The timing matters as much as the content, and eaten a few hours before sleep, pumpkin seeds deliver their effect precisely when the brain's demand is highest. The third food requires a small shift in how you see something you may already have in your kitchen: extra virgin olive oil, not as a cooking fat, not simply as a healthier alternative, as the only food source of a compound called oleocanthal, and oleocanthal does something that has drawn sustained attention from researchers studying how the aging brain removes its own waste. Its anti-inflammatory mechanism resembles, at a molecular level, the way ibuprofen works, targeting the same inflammatory pathways that chronic neuroinflammation depends on. But beyond reducing inflammation, oleocanthal appears to support the specific enzymes the brain uses to transport beta-amyloid out of neurons and across the blood-brain barrier for removal. Research published in the journal Toxicology and Applied Pharmacology found evidence that oleocanthal stimulated the production of these transport proteins, effectively supporting the same clearing process that the glymphatic system performs each night. It is not simply reducing the inflammatory interference that slows the cleanup. It may be directly supporting the cleanup itself, and this is where things begin to connect in a way that is worth pausing on. Blueberries reinforce the blood-brain barrier and reduce the neuroinflammation that degrades it. Extra virgin olive oil interrupts inflammatory signaling through a different pathway and supports the enzymes that move toxic proteins out of brain cells. 2 foods, 2 mechanisms, 1 shared outcome: a brain environment that is less inflamed, less obstructed, and more capable of the nightly restoration it is always trying to perform. 2 tablespoons of genuine extra virgin olive oil in the evening, the kind that produces a slight peppery sensation at the back of the throat, which indicates the presence of oleocanthal, is enough to deliver a meaningful concentration. Drizzled over vegetables, used in a simple dressing, incorporated into dinner in whatever way fits naturally, consistently over weeks. That is when it begins to accumulate into something real. The fourth food carries a history that is worth acknowledging. Directly, because for millions of older adults, the habit that was built around avoiding it may have quietly cost the brain something significant: eggs. For decades, the yolk was treated as a cardiovascular liability. Dietary cholesterol was assumed to translate directly into blood cholesterol and into heart disease risk. Millions of people removed it from their diets based on guidance that seemed medically sound at the time. The cardiovascular science has been substantially revised since then. The connection between dietary cholesterol and blood cholesterol turned out to be far more complex than the original guidance suggested. But the nutritional consequence of that mass avoidance for the brain specifically has received far less attention than it deserves. Egg yolks are the single most concentrated dietary source of choline, and choline is the direct precursor to acetylcholine, the neurotransmitter most fundamentally tied to memory formation, learning, and the ability to hold and retrieve information. When you follow the thread of a conversation, when you learn something new and find it accessible the next morning, when you recall a name or a face or a specific detail from last week, acetylcholine is at the center of all of it. After the age of 60, the brain's ability to synthesize choline internally declines. The neurons that depend on acetylcholine for their signaling become progressively less efficient as choline availability decreases, and during sleep, precisely when the brain is consolidating the day's experiences into long-term memory, this deficiency limits how completely that consolidation can occur. The Framingham Heart Study, one of the longest-running cognitive research programs in existence, found that higher dietary choline intake was associated with better performance on memory and cognitive assessments, and with measurably larger brain volume in aging adults. Larger brain volume, not a subtle or ambiguous finding. 2 eggs at dinner, yolk included, provide a substantial portion of the daily choline intake that research associates with these outcomes. The shift is not complicated, but for someone who avoided egg yolks for 20 years based on advice that has since been reconsidered, recognizing what that avoidance may have cost the brain is a meaningful moment. The fifth food tends to produce a reaction somewhere between surprise and mild disbelief when it appears in this context: dark chocolate. Genuine dark chocolate, 70% cacao or higher, in a modest amount, eaten in the evening. The compounds responsible for its effect on the brain are called cocoflavanols, and they operate through a mechanism that is distinct from everything discussed so far. The brain consumes a disproportionate share of the body's blood supply relative to its size. Every region depends on continuous, precisely regulated circulation, oxygen, glucose, and nutrients delivered reliably not just during waking hours but throughout the night when repair and consolidation are actively underway. Any reduction in that supply, even a mild one sustained over time, compromises the efficiency of every process that depends on it. After 60, cerebral blood flow naturally declines. Blood vessels become less flexible. Their ability to dilate dynamically in response to the brain's changing demands diminishes. And the regions most dependent on precise circulation, including the hippocampus, the structure most directly involved in forming and retrieving memories, begin to reflect that reduced supply in their function. Cocoflavanols have been shown in clinical trials to meaningfully improve cerebral blood flow in older adults. A study published in Nature Neuroscience found that high flavanol cocoa consumption over 3 months produced measurable improvements in memory performance specifically associated with the hippocampal region, improvements directly correlated with increased blood flow to that area. Beyond circulation, cocoflavanols support the production of BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a compound that promotes the growth of new neural connections, strengthens existing ones, and supports the brain's capacity to adapt and reorganize. BDNF declines with age. That decline is associated with reduced cognitive flexibility and increased vulnerability to memory loss. Cocoflavanols help push back against it. 1 to 2 small squares of dark chocolate in the evening, not as an indulgence, as a deliberate, targeted act of support for a brain preparing for its most important hours. Now take a step back and look at what these 5 foods are doing together, because the individual benefits, as real as they are, do not capture what happens when all 5 are present consistently. Blueberries reinforce the brain's protective barrier and reduce the neuroinflammation that degrades it. Extra virgin olive oil suppresses inflammatory signaling through a separate pathway and supports the enzymes that help the brain clear its own toxic waste. Pumpkin seeds create the neurochemical conditions that allow deep sleep, the state in which the glymphatic system reaches its peak, in which memory consolidation moves into its most productive phase, in which every other food on this list becomes more effective because the system they support is finally running the way it was designed. 2. Eggs provide the choline that the brain converts into the neurotransmitter memory depends on most directly, and dark chocolate improves the blood flow that delivers choline, anthocyanins, oleocanthal, and every other nutrient to the brain's tissue efficiently because without adequate circulation, even the best inputs cannot reach the places that need them. What happens next is the part no one talks about. When these 5 foods are eaten consistently, not occasionally, not when convenient, but as a genuine pattern, the brain's internal environment begins to shift in ways that are measurable and real. The inflammatory load decreases, the blood-brain barrier becomes more resistant to the permeability that age causes. The glymphatic clearing process has better conditions in which to operate. Memory consolidation during sleep becomes more complete, and the acetylcholine system, the neurotransmitter network that memory retrieval depends on, has the raw material it needs to function at a higher level. This is not a collection of isolated benefits. It is a system, each element supporting a different layer of the same process, and together they create an internal environment that the aging brain cannot create for itself but can maintain remarkably well when given the right inputs at the right time. Here is something specific and immediate you can begin tonight. In the early evening, build dinner around 2 eggs cooked however you prefer, a side of vegetables dressed with 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. Simple, no complexity required. About an hour before sleep, a small bowl of blueberries alongside a handful of pumpkin seeds, 2 minutes of preparation, 5 nutrients delivered at the precise moment the brain's demand for them is highest. Then a square or 2 of dark chocolate, 70% or higher. The final piece, that is it. No unusual ingredients, no significant expense, no complicated regimen. 5 foods timed to the hours when the brain's nightly systems are preparing to engage, eaten consistently enough to accumulate a real biological effect. The brain does not ask for perfection. It responds to patterns, and it responds more readily than most people expect, even in later decades of life, even after years of not knowing what it was missing. If someone you know is dismissing their moments of forgetfulness as simply getting older if they stopped eating egg yolks 20 years ago and never questioned why, if they reach for sleep aids instead of understanding what the brain actually needs to sleep deeply, share this with them. Not because this channel benefits from it, because the window in which early nutritional support makes its greatest difference is not unlimited, and the people in your life who are inside that window right now deserve to know what you now know. One final thing, and it matters. Everything here is general health education. It is not a substitute for a conversation with a physician who knows your complete medical history. If you are managing any neurological condition, taking medications, or have specific health concerns, bring these ideas to your doctor before making changes. The goal of this video is to inform, and the most powerful thing you can do with that information is take it into a conversation with someone qualified to apply it to your specific life and your specific brain. What you have now is awareness, and awareness acted on early enough is where the difference is made.